This is the new Honda Civic Saloon, and as you can see from the front, it looks more or less like a normal Civic hatchback, and at the back it looks slightly different to a Civic hatchback. But what really sets this car apart? What's different? Now forgive me while I ask for some YouTube charity. If you enjoy the videos that we do, make sure you subscribe and make sure you click to get notifications, and make sure you like this video and make sure you comment on it and share it with other people. And if you want to, it'd be quite nice if you visit newmotoring.com. Now I must admit, I do feel like something of a Civic connoisseur. Normally when I get a car, my friends don't ask me what car I'm getting. The first question they ask, and they want a yes or no answer, is it another Civic? Why? Well, the Civic was one of the first cars I ever got to drive as a journalist, more than 7 years ago now. And since then, I've spent more than 10 weeks behind the wheels of various Civics. Petrols, diesels, manuals, automatics, hatchbacks, estates, Type Rs, normal Civics, older Civics, the original Civic, and now the Saloon, again. Those of you with a good memory will know that I drove the Civic Saloon on the car's launch at the end of 2018. In fact, it was this exact car, LOA, or as I like to call it, Lola. But as I've said many, many times before, launches are quite tight affairs, so it's always good to drive a car for a longer period of time after the launch. There's only so much you can learn if you drive a car for a few hours or for a few hundred miles, whereas if you live with it for a week, say, you get to know it so much better. And so here we are again, and rather than me just repeating myself entirely, rather than me just doing another review of a Civic Saloon, what I thought I'd focus on instead is how this car is different to the hatchback. This generation of Civic Saloon is 46mm wider, it's 74mm longer and 20mm lower than the previous generation of Civic Saloon that was around in about 2008. It's also 16 kilos lighter and 52% stiffer. The pillars are thinner too, and the driving position is lower, and the boot isn't just bigger, but the actual boot opening, or as Honda put it, the pass-through, is bigger too. Now compared to the Civic hatchback, the standard 5-door Civic, this is longer. It's 4,644mm long. The standard Civic hatchback is 4,518mm long. It's very technical and very, very precise. It's also taller at 1,416mm, but it has the same width, 1,799mm, and the same wheelbase, 2,698mm. The result is that you've got more headroom, you've got more legroom, and you've got more knee room. Can you believe it? Honda does actually measure those things. All car companies measure those things. And it might sound irrelevant, but when you're building a car for hundreds of thousands of people, you need everything to be very, very precise. Although I don't need to tell you that, so I'm sorry if I've just bored you to death. As I said, compared to the old Civic Saloon, this has got a bigger boot, but it also does have a bigger boot than the Civic hatchback. This measures 519 litres in total, and that's up from 478 litres for the Civic hatch. But because the boot opening is slightly smaller, because you haven't got that giant hatchback opening, actually it doesn't really feel any bigger. And besides, the difference between 478 and 519 isn't huge. It's not going to be noticeable unless you get out, I don't know, tape measure or balloons, or I don't know, however they measure it, but you won't really notice it. What you will notice is that opening is smaller. As for weight, well, when I first drove this car, Honda said that the difference between this, the Saloon, and the Civic hatch was only a few kilos. This would only be a few kilos heavier. But actually, now I've had a chance to look at the specs properly, thoroughly, and really go into Honda's figures, it looks as though the Saloon could be anything between 40 and 60 kilos heavier than the hatchback. That's quite a big leap in weight. As for engines, the biggest difference between the Saloon and the hatch is that you can't buy the 1.5 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine with 180 brake horsepower. You can get it in the hatch, but not in this. And the reason is because of emissions. And I think that's a really big shame, because that engine, although everyone bangs on about how good the 1 litre 3-cylinder turbocharged petrol is, that 1.5 litre I think is a really, really good engine. I think if I was going to buy a Civic, it would have that 1.5 litre engine in it. So your options are the 1 litre 3-cylinder turbocharged petrol engine with 124 brake horsepower, or the 1.6 litre turbo diesel with 119 brake horsepower. Comparing economy and emissions at this stage, when I'm recording this now, is actually a little bit difficult, because since the original Civic hatchback was launched in 2017, the way in which cars are measured for economy and for emissions has changed. So the figures I've got for this, the Saloon, well, they were recorded and measured in a different way to the ones that I have for the car that was launched in 2017, the hatchback. But purely in terms of performance, the difference between the two is fairly negligible. As an example, in base trim, the 1 litre 3-cylinder turbocharged petrol engine will do 0 to 62 miles an hour in 10.4 seconds. That's in the hatchback. In the Saloon, it will do 0 to 62 miles an hour in 10.7 seconds. So there is a difference, but it is, as I said, very, very small. This car has the 1.6 litre turbo diesel. It's got 119 brake horsepower, 221 pounds-feet of torque, and it should get more than 80 miles to the gallon, 83 miles to the gallon to be precise. 0 to 62 miles an hour takes 9.9 seconds, and the top speed is 125 miles an hour. When it comes to gearboxes, it gets quite interesting for the Civic Saloon, because with both the petrol and the diesel you can have this, a 6-speed manual, and it's a really, really nice gearbox actually. Compared to some of its competitors, Honda really knows how to make a good gearbox. But if you have an automatic, in the petrol it's a CVT gearbox, but in the diesel it's a 9-speed automatic, a traditional automatic gearbox. What's interesting is that if you go for a manual gearbox, it's the diesel that is the faster car. It's faster than the petrol. But if you go for an automatic, it's actually the petrol that is faster than the diesel, because it's got a CVT rather than a normal 9-speed automatic gearbox. So the CVT can hold the engine in its power band for longer. Suspension, well, you've got a multi-link setup at the rear and you've got McPherson struts at the front. Physically, it's the same technology. However, the Saloon has been tuned to be slightly softer, and you can feel that. It's not floppy or wobbly or anything like that. It drives quite similarly, but you can just notice it's a little bit softer, it's a little bit more comfortable. However, where you can get adaptive dampers on some of the top spec cars for the Civic hatchback, you cannot get them for the Civic Saloon. It's a little bit of a shame, but there we are. The steering is a variable ratio electromechanical power steering system, and it's really, really good actually. Again, like the gearbox, Honda knows how to make a good steering system. Despite it being the same system though, there are differences again between this, the Saloon, and the hatchback. In the hatchback, if you go for a diesel, the steering ratio, lock to lock, it's 2.22 turns lock to lock. If you go for the 1 litre petrol, it's 2.14 turns lock to lock. But in this, the Saloon, whether you go for the petrol or the diesel, it's 2.22 turns lock to lock. So that is a very, very small difference, but a difference nonetheless. It means the steering, if you bought this Saloon with a 1 litre engine, isn't quite as quick as it would be if you bought the same engine in the hatchback. And what about the brakes? Well, in the hatch, depending on the trim, you either get 15-inch ventilated discs up front and solid 15-inch discs at the back, or you get ventilated 15-inch discs at the front and 14-inch solid discs at the back. In the Saloon, no matter what engine or trim you go for, you get 16-inch ventilated discs up front and 15-inch discs at the back. And the tyres, even if you get exactly the same wheels, the tyres are slightly different. On the Saloon, you just get a little bit more sidewall, and I can only assume again that it's to make this car a little bit softer, a little bit more compliant. Finally, what about the Civic Type R? Will there be a Saloon Type R? Unfortunately, no. there won't be. Honda doesn't have any plans to build a saloon Type R, which I think is a great shame, just because it would give me another reason, another excuse really, to drive a Civic Type R. They are brilliant, but it kind of makes sense. And also, what would it look like? I'm kind of used to the Civic Type R's looks now. It looks very in your face, it's very shouty, but the performance matches with that. It's fantastic to drive. But a Civic Saloon, when it's supposed to be the more comfortable version, it's supposed to be the more relaxed, long-distance cruiser kind of car, what would it look like with a giant wing on the back and 3 exhausts? Would that work? Would it? Prices start at £19,395. That's for the entry-level petrol. For the entry-level diesel, it's £20,745. The most expensive Civic Saloon you can buy is diesel in top-spec automatic form, and that's £27,120. It's quite a lot of money. The Saloon is different to the hatch in so many tiny ways, but it's also identical in so many ways. What's important though is that it still feels like a Civic. The looks won't be to everyone's taste, but to drive, everything from the gearbox to the steering, it's still one of the best handling, the most enjoyable cars to drive, the most enjoyable normal cars to drive on sale. It's no wonder the Civic Type R is so good to drive, and it's because Honda has got such a strong base platform to work from. So would you buy the Saloon or the hatchback? For what reason would you buy the Saloon over the hatchback? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want a Saloon Type R, definitely let me know in the comments below.